Remembering my own parents in their late 80s and their loss of memory, the confusion over past events, and recalling how a photograph or a reminder would often rekindle their memory, I've decided to make a few notes of people and happenings during my lifetime to which I and my family can always refer. Well, I'm now 75 years old and the eldest son of Victorian and undemonstrative parents who left us much to our own devices. My older sister Joan and two younger brothers, Dick and Geoffrey, each arrived on the scene at approximately 2-year intervals. Our family home was located in a 5-acre field at the bottom of Bramfield Lane on the North Road. This field was purchased from a local farmer in the late 1920s, and it's now split up into a variety of houses and gardens, but the original house still remains. It was designed by my father and built by a local builder, Mr. Scales. All the electrical and finishing work was done by my father's employees, imported from his engineering business at 68 Victoria Street, SW1. One of the features was an enormous coke-fired furnace, which was installed in the cellar. It's a wonder that this monstrosity didn't kill us all, as there was no ventilation or flue, simply a direct discharge of hot air up through a heavily baffled grating straight into the hall above. Whilst all this building and finishing work was in progress, my sister and I were sent away to an infant boarding school at Cold Norton in Essex. Fortunately, it was a reasonably happy and sensible place run by an elderly couple named Tugwell. There was a large garden and toy room. They gave us an hour's instruction each day on painting and reading, and I recall an equal number of boys and girls, all of us in the region of 5 to 6 years old, and about 10 in all. I also recall 6 small boys upstairs after breakfast, sitting on 6 small white tin commodes. Here we had to stay until a result was achieved, no matter how red or painful the ring round our small backsides. The main entertainment between inspections was stuffing strips of loo paper down the rather draughty cracks in the floorboards, which no doubt added considerably to the comfort and delight of the many mice that scuffled beneath the floorboards. It was here that I recall my first introduction to blood sports. I was playing on the lawn in front of the house one warm summer's evening, accompanied by several big bats swooping low overhead. From the secret hiding place among some laurel bushes I extracted my homemade bow and arrow and prepared to defend myself. Well, it so happened that either the unfortunate bat collided with the arrow or it suffered a direct hit. Either way, the luckless flopping object fell to the ground and was pounced upon, whereupon I was bitten. A bleeding and tearful infant presented himself to the kitchen staff for treatment and sympathy. The incident appeared to cause considerable concern when I was adamant that this innocent creature had viciously swooped upon me. Doors and windows banged shut all over the house, and from that moment Count Dracula had arrived, and henceforth none of us were allowed out after supper. Apart from our daily instruction in painting and reading, we occasionally had morning assembly and singing. Here I was introduced for the first time to a man called Jesus, who seemed to be having a pretty miserable time trying to make people like him, was going to do pretty awful things to people when his father could find time to come down out of the sky to help him. On completion of the work at Beanside Lodge, as the house was now called, my sister and I returned home. We now had a young resident governess named Miss Henson, who was very shy and kind, but I can't remember her teaching us anything. We also seemed to have acquired a rather buxom upstairs maid, Mary McCarroll. None of us could understand a word she said. She seemed to spend an awful lot of her time walking about upstairs in her bra and knickers with a silly smile on her face. I think she left after a week or so. In those early days at home, in my short grey trousers, this 5-acre garden seemed vast to me and very exciting, with its 300 yards of river bean running along its north boundary and a fine 40-yard long railway tunnel spanning the river at the bottom. The eastern boundary was the main railway line to the north of England via Stevenage, where we saw magnificent express trains like the Mallard and the Flying Scotsman thundering their way north. My father made frequent visits to his office in Victoria Street in a newly acquired family saloon, a large grey sleeve-valve Willis Knight, YE437. Would now be worth a king's ransom, but sadly finished up as a derelict shelter for chickens, and eventually became a source for nesting material for birds and the chickens as the upholstery deteriorated. I recall that Bobbles, our Persian cat, eventually had 6 kittens among the horsehair and springs in the front passenger seat. There were some splendid oak and ash trees in the garden and 2 very attractive quarter-acre islands which my father had constructed by diverting the river halfway along the north boundary. These were covered in snowdrops in the early spring and patches of violets in early summer. The river ran high, fast and clear, and displayed all the glory and life of a spring-fed chalk stream. It teemed with wild brown trout, many of which were over 5 pounds, and a glory to behold when they ventured up to us in February to spawn on the beautiful clean gravel on our north boundary. They came up from Seal Deeps, which ran downstream from the railway bridge for approximately 3/4 of a mile. They fed audibly under the railway bridge during mayfly time, amplified by the acoustics of the tunnel. Apart from these magnificent brown trout, there were grayling, pike, roach over 2 pounds, eels, crayfish, stone loach and bullheads, all in great abundance. The food fauna among the weeds and gravel was extraordinarily prolific. Some years later, when on leave from the Royal Air Force, I hooked and landed a beautiful wild brown trout of 7.5 pounds during the mayfly time, and after a tremendous battle just upstream from the railway bridge. Apart from the remarkable fish and insect life, it was not unusual to see such things as otter, water rail, teal, water vole and shrike in the hawthorn hedges with their insect food impaled on thorns, and on 2 occasions I saw bittern in the reeds on Seal Deeps, which I visited frequently in our punt on fishing trips with school friends during the 1930s. I also recall catching 2 big eels, one of 5 pounds and one of 4 pounds, on a night fishing trip. We were ledgering with lobworms under the railway bridge. My companion was terrified and never came night fishing again. At the bottom of the garden was a lovely secluded spring-fed pond fringed with tall bulrushes and other rushes. It drained back into the main river some 100 yards upstream from the railway bridge. Here I made myself a very comfortable hide and lookout on the edge of this pond in the crown of an old pollarded willow some 10 feet off the ground. I was somewhere around the age of 10. Here I stored my catapult and essential stores such as apples, tomatoes, carrots and other good things, and these were obtained from the vegetable garden and greenhouse, which was attended with such obvious diligence and affection by Mr. Catlin, our aged gardener. It was from this hide that I witnessed so much of nature's drama, and probably missed a great deal, as it was so comfortable up there that I often fell asleep. I saw such things as a large pike following and eventually taking an unsuspecting water vole as it swam across the pond, a kingfisher colliding with a very large dragonfly, otters at play, and many other remarkable happenings. Mr. Catlin was one of my best friends. He was a dear man in his late 60s. He used to tie oranges and brightly coloured sweets to leafless branches of fruit trees during Christmas and on our birthdays. He taught me so much about insects, birds and small mammals, and found me dozens of birds' nests, from wrens to snipe and barn owls. It was Catlin who made me my first trout rod. He cut an 8-foot hazel switch, which he suspended with a heavy weight tied to the butt, and after several impatient weeks of waiting for it to dry and straighten, the great day finally came. 12 feet of fine macrame string, well dressed with mutton fat, served as the main line. This was bound to the tip and followed by a short length of thread from my mother's work basket. A homemade fly tied from a grey cockerel hackle completed the outfit. I sallied forth and stalked my first trout. There he lay in front of me, a foot out from the bank, just below a big clump of kingcups, all 8 inches of him. Steady rhythmic movements of his tail and pectoral fins, inspecting and sometimes taking much of what floated over him. My first unpracticed cast embedded the fly securely in the clump of kingcups, and the spotted monster shot downstream past me and into some secret refuge known only to him. Well, several tangles and aerial disasters later, I retraced my steps. There he was, larger than life, back in the same old spot. A perfect cast, a perfect take, and a very imperfect strike, which left me without fly, line, and rod tip, all of which were retrieved later by Catlin, minus the fish. I was now a day pupil at Hartford Grammar School, with 300 other inmates, none of whom, I might say, carried flick knives, abused teachers, had previous convictions, or teenage parents. Neither were there any immature or ignorant teachers, as far as I can remember. A lot of my newfound friends seemed very reluctant to come into the garden at Beanside Lodge, but preferred to sit on their cycles and lean over the gate to talk. I found out eventually that the cause was a great fear of my father's large silver hook, which replaced his right hand, and his authoritative voice and manner. He did in fact lose his right hand and part of the sight in his left eye when a Zeppelin dropped a bomb on Bull Plain during the 1418 war. This Zeppelin was shot down at Cuffley later the same day. My father finished up in Highgate Hospital, where he met my mother, who was a nurse at this hospital. Well, I recall just tolerating most of my incarceration at school. My mind persistently wandered back to such infinitely more important matters as, are my Wellingtons dry inside yet, or have the thrush's eggs hatched, had my snare caught anything, or did the ferrets need cleaning out, and so on. It was a long drawn-out clock-watching exercise. I was fairly good at English, woodwork, and history, and displayed a glimmer of real enthusiasm when English lessons permitted individuals to lecture on their own chosen subject. Now, these occasions allowed me to bring and discuss such familiar things as mayflies, field mice, crayfish, eels, and large dead pike. The latter commanded great attention and enthusiasm when they were disemboweled on newspaper to display their partly digested stomach contents, which ranged from small trout to crayfish and frogs, and on one occasion a dabchick. Even the masters asked questions and took a genuine interest, so these lectures probably saved me from total academic disaster. It was fortunate for me that my father had a small library on the upstairs landing at Beanside. This contained a number of books that influenced my life. As children, we were not allowed access at any time, so it was only when my father was away on business that they were available. There were such gems as Prester John, 3 volumes of With the Flag to Pretoria, The Sea Around Us by Rachel Carson, Animal Life in Fresh Water by Helen Mellenby, Minor Tactics on a Chalk Stream by Skews, and a marvellous illustrated booklet by Mr. A.R. Piatt, which discussed and illustrated artificial propagation of trout eggs, river management, and much in general to do with trout fishing and trout rivers. Much of these books I read and digested with the sort of enthusiasm that my then peers probably read H.G. Wells and Biggles.